Welcome. Thank you so much for being here for today's Bridge Culture Club event. My name is Amber DeLind. I am the Membership and Engagement Director at Bridge, Michigan. Today is one event in our bi-monthly series called Bridge Culture Club. And today we are discussing the film Pelkie, 100 Years of Finnishness in Michigan's North Woods. Today's event is hosted by Bridge, Michigan. As I said, my name is Amber DeLind. I'm also joined on the call today by my colleague, Rebecca Fidua, who is on mute, but there and standing by in case you have any technology questions. You can feel free to send her a direct message. She's here. Thank you all for joining us. In case you aren't familiar with us, Bridge Michigan is Michigan's nonprofit, nonpartisan news source covering issues that matter to you and to your community. If you don't already, you can subscribe for free to our email newsletters at bridgemi.com. Also, those who are current Bridge Club members or people who have donated to Bridge over the last year, that's what we mean by member, get a number of benefits, including access to free electronic copies of each Bridge Culture Club selection. You can become a member today if you aren't already by visiting the link we'll drop in the chat in just a moment. And welcome and thank you especially to our Bridge members who are here today. Today, we are so lucky to be joined by director and filmmaker Michael Loukinen. I'll give a full introduction of him momentarily, but we are incredibly honored that he was willing to spend the time to join us today for a discussion of his film. Today's discussion will look like this. I'll start with an introduction of Michael. I will then lead a discussion with Michael about the film for about 35 to 40 minutes. And then if you all have questions, we'll turn to your questions. If you have any questions for Michael, please type them into the chat at any time. However, please stay muted throughout today's discussion unless you're one of the speakers. We will be concluding today's discussion by 1 p.m. And as you heard, we are recording. So if you'd like to watch this conversation again or are interested in sharing it with a friend, you can find it on our website tomorrow on bridgemi.com. And now I'd like to introduce filmmaker Michael Loukinen. In 1980, a young professor of sociology at Northern Michigan University began a journey that he had no idea would last for 30 years. As part of his work studying the Finnish culture of Upper Peninsula, Michael Loukinen came to know a multi-generational family in North Ironwood who exemplified the changes occurring in such immigrant families in the region. Inspired by his love for documentary filmmaking, he raised funds to make his own film about this family, Finnish American Lives, which was released in 1982 to great regional and national acclaim and brought attention to the history and culture of the Upper Peninsula's people. 30 years and 13 films later, Loukinen is still pondering his next project. Loukinen grew up in downtown Detroit and later in its northwestern suburbs. In both places, he heard his parents speaking Finnish with relatives and friends. They were descendants of Upper Peninsula Finns who had emigrated from the Sami region of Finland. Summers were spent on a small dairy farm in Jacobsville owned by his aunt and uncle. As he said, I lived the life of a Finnish American farm boy during the summers and thus became half Yooper. Michael, welcome, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I have a number of questions that I wrote up as I was watching the film, and I'm sure many of the folks, the nearly 50 folks who are here today will have questions themselves. So without any further ado, I'd love to get us started. My first question for you is, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and your connections to Michigan and the UP, and then lead us into why you chose to make Pelkie?
Okay. Born in downtown Detroit, about 5th grade, moved to a suburb, Redford Township, and as did many Finnish Americans. My folks are from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. All my ancestors are from Finland. They settled in the Copper Country. And I spent summers from about age 4 or 5 to about 17 on a small dairy farm, doing all the work of a farm boy, and made a strong impression of my life. Not everyone, many people seem to think that their childhood was just the greatest time of their life, but it was for me. I mean, I worked my butt off. I mean, farm boys, but it was good. Then one thing led to another. I got a PhD in sociology, and I got a Ford Foundation fellowship. It was at the time when the White Pine copper mine was closing, and many people were worried what's going to happen to the population there. So my two professors, Dr. Frederick Weissenen from the UP, and Professor Bo Anderson, originally from Sweden, they wanted graduate students to study informal helping because one adaptation response to the decline of employment, monetary employment, is people help one another. And there's strong traditions of that in Finland, throughout rural America, throughout the rural world, as far as that goes. So I went to the Upper Peninsula, and I was advised by the rural sociology department at Michigan State University, which, by the way, back then had one of the top rural sociology departments in the nation, to contact the Michigan State University extension agents, those people who advise farmers in their county. And I stopped by in Lawrence, Michigan, a town about maybe 14 miles from Pelkie, and I was advised to go to Pelkie because there's a lot of cooperation. That was the word, cooperation. And he advised me on a place to stay. That was with Sylvia Jokela, who was the cook for the local school, and probably one of the best cooks in the county. And I moved in and got to know everyone in Pelkie, studied it for a while, wrote a doctoral dissertation on it, and promised the people if they filled out my extensive survey that was thicker than the Pelkie telephone book, that I would write a history of the community. Well, I wrote several articles, historical, cultural, sociological articles. I was a professor of sociology, and but I never really put the book together. And then I became a documentary filmmaker. It wasn't planned. One thing led to another, and I made a series of films. I think I've made about 20 or 21 already. But my first film was an award-winning film, and a real award-winning film at brutal competition. And suddenly I was an award-winning filmmaker, and I was eligible to apply for grants based on that credibility. And so I made a whole bunch of films. And prior to this film, I made films about Finnish Americans and quite a few about the Anishinaabe, otherwise known as Ojibwe. I think I made about 6 films about them. Excuse me if I sneeze or cough. The pollen's thick up here now. I made a documentary about a copper country ghost town called Winona, same name as a community in Minnesota, maybe about 28 miles from Houghton, not that far. And so that launched me into community history. I really love that film. It's a good film, not that many people have seen it. And then it occurred to me that I should make a film about Pelkie. And my longtime collaborator, John Sardi, who's listed down there in the screen, he's currently in Austria. We talked about it, and I launched the film. And fortunately, I've been helped by great Northern Michigan University film students. And fortunately, one thing led to another, and I collaborated with Alex Meyer, spelled Maier, and he helped me with my last 7 films, I think it is. And we made the documentary about Pelkie, and I had video recorded scenes way before on just home VHS equipment. This is before I thought of myself as becoming a filmmaker. I just wanted to video record my friends who are getting old. And so the film that's put together has just old old VHS tape and then high definition video that we use today. And I was struggling to put it together and had grants to do it. And right toward the end, John Starry and his wife Christine donated funds to help me complete it. And many people from Pelkie donated, and everyone from Pelkie helped me. I mean, it was amazing. And there are people who donated to the NMU Foundation, which, by the way, we can still use some donations. NMU Foundation, you have to request that it be deposited in the Up North Films account. Many people donated, and I don't even know who they are because the foundation keeps the donations separate, like it's dark money or something. So I couldn't even thank people. But people helped me, and with the final donation by John and Christine Sorry, we completed the film, and I got the monkey off my back, a promise that I had made. And by the way, you said for the next 30 years I made film. That's old text. It was 40 years that I made film.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. That is so fascinating. So it was a labor of love and many years in the making, the way that it came together. I was curious about that as I was seeing so many people. I mean, the participants were just the way that they were so open with their stories. It was just something that I learned so much and I really enjoyed it. I'm curious because this is the first of your films that I've seen. How is Pelkie similar to your other films, and in which ways is it different?
Uh, Pelkie is very similar to my first film, Finnish American Lives, uh, and which it's still selling. I made that, I think I completed it in 1982, and the darn thing's still selling. It's become sort of an ethnic classic. But it just, of course, is the sociology of aging and rural sociology that intersects with those themes. That was about one family in Ironwood, Michigan, that had an elderly Finnish grandfather who had one foot in the grave. His wife died, and he imagined that she was calling him. And second generation children taking care of him. And so the grandfather was there, his children, and a Finnish immigrant wife who married the second generation son were caring for him. And there were three of his grandchildren there. And that was basically the farm that I experienced as a child in Jacobsville. And so I knew it all came to me. And there were many things that made that film special. But that was about one family. And then the Pelkie documentary was about a whole community pulling in quite a few families. Tragically, I missed some people because while I was interviewing and hanging out with the community in my earlier days, I didn't know that I was going to become a filmmaker. So in retrospect, I would have video recorded everything or audio recorded everything.
Thank you very much. When you talk about, the way that you were able to sort of gather people's stories over the years, did what people say shape your arc, or did you kind of have a sense of the story that you wanted to tell about Pelkie, or did it really kind of come together depending on what people told you?
Well, I'm an egghead. I'm a cultural sociologist, so I knew the themes, the historical and social fabric themes to explore. And so when I interviewed people, I had sort of a matrix of the themes and the interview subjects. And when I got a conversation going that would express what I wanted in accordance with one of the themes, such as clearing the land, they cleared the land by hand, for God's sakes, enormous pine stumps. I would let people go. And once I got someone talking about the theme that I was interested in, I shut up. I just let them go. And my wife won't agree with this, but one of my skills as a filmmaker is knowing when to shut up and let people talk, and then encourage them. And I would use prompts such as, uh, "Tell me more about this," or "Really? What about those stumps? Uh, did you use dynamite? How did you pull them?" I'd give little prompts, and they would tell more and more and more, and I would shut up. And that's how I got the story. Get the interview subjects on the stream of consciousness on a theme that they know that's grounded in their own experience, and let them go. And of course, that makes editing a nightmare. But I've had good editors, patient editors like Alex, and prior to him, Grant Gustin, and many others. And I had the good fortune too of working with very, very good filmmakers as advisors. Tom Davenport, who's just outstanding, award-winning filmmaker, lives in Virginia, has helped me from the beginning. He was the first filmmaker I worked with. And then Miroslav Janek, a Czech filmmaker who's now a professor of filmmaking in Prague. He taught me a lot. And it was, so I learned by working with filmmakers as opposed to reading books on how to make films. I'm not an expert on films in genre. I'm just a documentary filmmaker. So, yeah.
Absolutely. One question that I didn't have down on my list, but I'm just curious. You said you've learned from so many great filmmakers around you. Did you study film at all, or did this sort of just come along as you became a sociologist?
No, I studied art for a while as an undergraduate, and started with 35 millimeter slides while I was working on my doctoral dissertation. And when I was faced with the prospect of keeping Sociology 101 students awake early in the morning, I found that slides woke them up. Images helped. And I also found that I had tape recorded some text, audio tapes. I would play some audio tape of someone actually talking, and they would listen to it. And so, in an attempt to keep students awake early in the morning, and sometimes I taught huge classes, a couple hundred people. I developed skill in filmmaking by trying to teach. And so it was from 35 millimeter slides to 35 millimeter slides in audio tape to film, actual film. My first 4 films were shot on 16 millimeter film. We're trying to get all that archival material as well as the originals digitized to high definition. The technology exists now, but it's enormously expensive. I have tons of great materials, but then I drifted to video, and so it was an attempt to be a decent teacher. And the first thing you have to do is maintain their attention, but you also have to do that in a documentary.
Sure. Well, I'm very grateful for sleepy 8 a.m. Undergraduates, because without them, we might not be able to see all of your incredible work. I want to turn a little bit to some of the subject within the film Pelkie. I think some of us may know a lot about the UP, some of us may know less. And one of the things that was so striking to me, especially as we were talking about the early history of Finnish immigrants in Pelkie, was that how really the abundant natural resources in the UP made a variety of careers possible for those in Pelkie and their surrounding area. How similar is that today? In which ways is this the same? I know farming has changed quite a bit. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes. Yes, it has changed. The Finnish immigrants who were recruited by the copper mining companies to come and work because they had a reputation of being hard workers. They had no prior mining experience in their work history, with the exception of some of the very first miners who were Finns living in Norway, who were the first ones recruited. And they're very literate. They're the first or, and at times, depending on the time period measured, most literate immigrant population ever to come to America. Finns and European Jews had the highest literacy rates, universal literacy. Basically, there's a state church in Finland, and if you couldn't read the Bible and answer questions uh, presented by the church lord who controlled the community, you couldn't become an adult and get married. So you had to read in order to breed. And so they're all literate. They wrote letters back home and they came to the copper country. That's my phone probably reminding me that there's this thing. Just ignore it. And so they worked in the copper mines and there were strikes and then the copper mines closed. And they came with the idea of most of them earning enough funds to return to Finland so they could buy a farm. But that possibility emerged in the cutover lands surrounding the copper and iron mining towns in northern Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So the mine shut down and they established farms in cutover forest lands. Well, they logged their own land and worked for logging companies to get enough money to pay for their land. And they started off with subsistence farms, agriculture, dairy agriculture for the most part, growing their own crops to feed their families, but it was dairy agriculture. And that went on quite well until the 1950s. Most of the people were farmers throughout the rural copper country. Well, the dairy agricultural industry collapsed for small farmers. Most of these farmers had from 12 to 20 cows milking herd. And they were able to keep it going because they established a farmers co-op, which allowed them to buy supplies at a lower by bulk purchases. And the co-op, the Pelkie cooperative, developed a creamery and a cheese factory, so they were able to market their products. But the cheese factory and creamery were shut down, so they had to ship it to other communities. They shipped it to the Copper Country Dairy, about 37 miles away. Then that closed, and they had to ship it to Superior, Wisconsin, about 300 miles away. So their possibilities of marketing their milk products collapsed. Transportation costs were too high. So dairy agriculture started to disappear in the 1950s. And 2 years after I completed the film, the last dairy farm in the Copper Country closed. Copper Country amounts to 4 different counties: Keweenaw, Ontonagon, and Houghton. The last one, now there are no dairy farmers. So originally, at the peak of their dairy farming, they had maybe 18 cows. Now there are herds of 15,000 cows. The largest dairy farm in Michigan has 15,000 cows. And I just read the other day that 75% of the milk produced in America is produced in farms with over 10,000 cows. So it became economically prohibitive for them to continue. Still, the forestry option remained. And meanwhile, people are leaving the community to work in outside towns. It became gradually a bedroom community. But now the technology of forestry work is such that the occupations are disappearing. There are very few people who, with a chainsaw and a truck, can go out and do their own logging. Right now, it's immense machinery. One person can do the work of half a dozen or maybe 10 traditional lumberjacks. So technology eliminated the dairy option and technology is eliminating the forestry option. There are still trees, but a massive investment is required to get the equipment to do the work that lumberjacks used to do. So technology wiped out their occupations, just as automobiles wiped out, eliminated those people who took care of horses and took care of shoeing the horses.
Sure. Wow, I did not know those statistics about dairy farming in particular. I did not know that the farms that were large are that large, and it makes it very difficult. How could any, a small farm would be very difficult to compete, just the market forces wouldn't allow for that. You mentioned in that last question the co-op. For those who may not have been able to watch the film yet, can you tell us a little bit more about the role of the co-op in Pelkie? It looks like such an amazing place in its heyday, and kind of why and how it ended.
Okay, I may have the dates incorrect. I'm just pulling it through my head. I think it was started as a farmers co-op around 1918, and it was originally created by farmers to buy farming equipment in bulk quantities, and also to ship their milk products, cheese and cream. But it expanded into a consumers co-op, and the principle behind that is the same as co-ops today, that you get a return from the profit based upon your consumption. If you spend a lot of money in the co-op, you get a check back at the end of the year. And that provided quite a few opportunities for full-time and part-time employment, and which helped people pay for their land. And people traveled from other communities to shop at the Pelkie Co-op because it was sort of like a department store. You could buy everything from formal wear for a wedding to boots appropriate for a lumberjack, as well as farming supplies. And they had a feed mill there where they ground the farmers' feed for their cattle, and they had a machine shop that repaired farming equipment. It was really substantial. And when I entered the community in 1972, there were all sorts of ads on the radio to shop at the Pelkie Co-op. It was one of the last co-ops in the area. And now we have health food oriented co-ops in urban areas. The same principle.
The photos from the opening day in particular just charmed me. It just looked like a place I would have loved to have been.
Yeah, and it was a visiting center when people. The standard joke was, you'd go to the co-op and you'd go to buy something, you'd end up talking with your friends and neighbors and go home and forget to buy it. Whatever it was that would happen. There were several jokes. Another joke was it was essentially 98% Finnish American.
Sure,
French Canadians started the community, but they moved out to be close to their local parishes in sawmill towns. And Finns came in. So the joke I heard when I first entered the community, what's yellow and black and has 32 fins? The Pelkie school bus, And then there were jokes about the Pelkie Co-op. If you can't find it there, you don't need it. Things like that.
I love that. Okay. Speaking of sort of your experiences, you talked about this a little bit at the beginning when you talked about your sort of reasons for making Pelkie. As we read in your biography, you experienced summers on a Finnish and American farm as a young man. Of the traditions that were sort of outlined in the film, which were most familiar or most meaningful to you?
Well, the answer is all of them in a way. Obviously, the agricultural extension agent who advised me to go to Pelkie did not do so on the basis of it being Finnish or Finnish American. They just cooperated. And that term was very salient because he had heard of the Pelkie Co-op. Everyone heard of the Pelkie Co-op in that area. And he would say, on a Saturday, you would drive down the Pelkie Tapiola Road, and on the left and on the right, you would see smoke wafting up from all the saunas in the air. So, of course, everyone had a sauna. And these weren't the electronic saunas like I had in my home. These were wood saunas. And there's something special about the wood sauna. It's the smell, everything about it is special. That was part of it. Of course, I heard the Finnish language. I have a few words, very limited vocabulary. My parents used the Finnish language as a secret language, Christmas gifts and other things that parents didn't want their children to know about. So virtually all of the third generation, such as myself, did not learn the Finnish language except for a few secret words that they weren't supposed to know about, unless they happened to live in a home with a grandfather or a grandmother. And then some of them are so fortunate to learn the Finnish language, and they are bilingual. But that, and of course, coffee visiting. What seemed to tie the community together was this household visiting, where people would drop in unannounced, and they would sit down and visit with people over coffee. Today, then, on a per capita basis, drink more coffee than any other population in the world. Why? I don't know. But I'm a coffee addict too. And that was part of it. But there's something about sitting down with coffee, always at the kitchen table and visiting. It's as though you enter a zone where you become a member of the family, because families sit around the dinner table. And that's where people stayed in touch with one another. They didn't text. And they talked about the illnesses and good things and bad things that were happening to their family. And for so many people were dairy farmers that they had something to talk about. I have this cow that has this thing. So, and if a farmer were ill and he could not milk cows have to be milked at exactly the same time every day, twice a day. They would tell a neighbor, and other neighbors would come milk the cows for him. So the informal helping system that was a response to essentially poverty was facilitated by household visiting. People stayed in touch with one another and knew when one another needed help. And traditions from Finland are very strong traditions of Finland for mutual help in rural areas. That and the fact that they had the same occupation and were constantly in touch with one another. That's so important. I'd say household visiting with extensive or partial use of the Finnish language were the salient cultural customs that reminded me of my childhood.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And the third part of the documentary sort of looks at Pelkie today, or Pelkie at the time when the film was put together, which was as now a few years ago. For those who may have not been in the Pelkie area recently, have there been any significant changes or developments in the Pelkie area or community?
Hopefully there's some people who know about current Pelkie. I get there every summer for about 3 or 4 visits, but other people, Pelkie folks, could probably answer that. Well, could answer it better than I could. But basically, the farms have been purchased by Mennonites. That's in the film. The word spread throughout Mennonite communities, and they bought many of the farms and fortunately kept them from collapsing and deteriorating. And for the most part, they developed home cottage industries. Uh, they sell eggs, they sell jams, wonderful jams produced by the Mennonites. They're marketed in local stores. Uh, and a lot of them are loggers. And those who farm beef cattle, you don't have to milk the cows every day. If you have beef cattle, you can work in a nearby town and come home and still have beef cattle. So that to the extent that agriculture exists, it's probably it's beef cattle farming or growing hay to sell to people with hobby farms and horses.
See, thank you.
But one of my friends in the community, in the film, right toward the end, Dr. Sally Nair, he said, people are buying homes, and we don't know who they are. They're just from all over, and some are speculators. And we recently sold a home in North Carolina. We had to fight off the speculators. People buy homes in order to resell them, and that occurred. But there's some employment nearby. There's a maximum security prison in a nearby community, maybe 7 miles from Pelkie. There's a casino, in Ojibwe Casino, about 5 miles from Pelkie. And there's employment in the communities of Houghton and Hancock, primarily Houghton. That's about 25 miles away. So it's a bedroom community but people don't visit like they used to. And when you're farming, you have the same schedule. You know when another person's done milking their cows. You know if it's raining, they're not harvesting hay. You know when it's time to visit, and you can connect. Now everyone's on a different schedule, and they don't connect. And the co-op's closed, so they don't have a central gathering place. What they really need is a good coffee shop there,
Yeah.
but it doesn't exist.
Okay, very good. I have a bit more of a philosophical question for you. I have one or two more questions for you, and then I'll turn to some of these reader questions that have come in. Thank you to those who have submitted those. In general, how do you think documentaries and other forms of storytelling can help preserve history and memory?
Very, very well. I'm astonished. I was going to write a book. I still may. I'm tilting toward that project now, uh, but my wife doesn't want me to do any more work because I've worked so hard all my life. She wants me to pay attention to her, and I'm thankful that I have a wife that would like me to pay attention to her. But it's I'm amazed at the power of documentaries, especially documentaries about the history of communities, and especially documentaries about the histories of overlooked and to some extent partially forgotten rural communities. This tiny community, Pelkie, we have 1,500 people on the Facebook page. They're contributing articles. They watch it. They talk about it. It encourages them to do some reading. And I think that's my bias as a filmmaker. I really don't like films where you have an external narrator. I know it's important and I know it's essential in some context, but I find that if you talk to people who were fighting a war, who were fighting a forest fire, talk to a policeman who's on the beat in downtown Detroit, firsthand reports without a lot of external narration saying, this is what you're seeing. You actually hear it from the people who are living it. Those types of documentaries, to me, given my biases, are very, very helpful. And with the internet, I mean, you can stream I've got, I think it's 20 films, might be 21. You can stream all my films now, thanks to Alex Mayer, who's a gifted filmmaker and making films in his own right, excellent films. He has learned how to stream them just in order to survive in his own filmmaking. So the technology is such. Imagine, rather than having everyone in an auditorium watching a film and discussing, people are everywhere, and some people have watched the films. Uh, what we're doing right now is mind-boggling. I in a way, I can't believe it. So the potential is there, and I was hired as a rural sociologist at Northern Michigan University in 1976, and sadly, subsequently, the department shut down the rural sociology course because they thought it was important, and it was for me to teach other things. So no one's teaching rural sociology in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. But rural America has been forgotten by people in urban areas, and some of the support for former President Trump comes from rural communities in the Upper Peninsula, in rural counties that have lost population. When you lose population, you lose jobs, you lose family connections. The schools start to close. The community deteriorates. In those communities in the Upper Peninsula, 90% support President Trump because they want to make America great again. And America, as they have experienced it, has declined. So I think there's a need for urban people and suburban people to pay attention to rural America, and documentaries about community help. Attachment to community is such a powerful thing. One of the epidemics in America is loneliness. I mean, it's actually, according to the Center for Disease Control, it's a risk factor on health equivalent to smoking, if you can believe that. I've read it in several places. And it's closely linked to addiction, other things. And they had a true sense, a deeper sense of community than I've ever witnessed before. I have pockets of friends that give the experience of community, but nothing like a whole community where everyone knows everyone. And it's because they did the same thing. They were able to connect with one another through household visiting, and so much of that's been lost. I think the extent to which we can reestablish communities will help the nation and will help individuals. And I think documentary films about communities can assist in that effort.
Absolutely. Thank you. I have one last question for you, and then I'm going to turn to some of our reader questions. You've hinted at a couple of things. What are you working on now?
Right now, I'm well, we spent the last 7 years caring for my mother-in-law who had dementia, and a lot of things were pushed on back burners, and I'm dealing with that, trying to simplify the economic situation and so on. So I'm not working on documentaries now, and my wife said, no more. It's time for us to pay attention to one another. She paid a price. She edited all of my proposals and was the first editor on all of my films that she, and she had a career. She was lieutenant colonel in the Army. And when she was away on duty, I could make films, but she's retired now, so I'm trying to be a decent husband. But I had a mystical spiritual experience a while back, about 6 or 7 years ago. In the middle of the morning, a golden light appeared in my bedroom. No sound, no images, and I felt absolute intense, almost telepathic, electromagnetic love and contentment. I didn't know how to happen. It just happened. That's what happened. So I'm reading everything about mysticism in different cultures, in particular Christian mysticism. And that's the sort of thing I'm preoccupied right now. I didn't consciously choose that. Something happened to me that my friends, my secular friends think, oh, that's cute. Michael had a psychological event that he thinks is real. And it was real. And I'm trying to figure out what happened. But I'm hoping to write a book about my filmmaking experience that would weave together a narrative about communities in the Upper Peninsula. I made 5 or 6 films about the Ojibwe, pretty good films. And I'd like to include that. And there is this connection between the Ojibwe and Finnish Americans that produced offspring called Findians. And there's quite a few of them. Several of the past officers of the Keweenaw Indian community have Finnish names. There's been intermarriage, and there's a story behind that. And so I'm interested in that connection. I have indigenous roots. Some they're indigenous people in northern Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Russia, and that's in me somehow. Part of that mystical experience I was telling about containing the presence of ancestors. It was all invisible. I felt it inside. So I'm pursuing the connection between the Ojibwe and Finnish, and particularly Finnish American culture. And we have these annual festivals called FinFest USA. It's in Duluth, I think August 26th through 28th. They've invited me to show my Ojibwe films at a Finnish festival. So that's what's preoccupying me right now.
Okay, thank you. We had a handful of questions from viewers, so I'm going to turn to those now. A viewer named Karen asked, how did you connect with the people who were interviewed in this film, and how did you find them?
Well, I studied and visited the film for about 40 years, so I knew people. They knew me. I didn't have to introduce myself. I had to introduce myself a little bit to some of the Mennonites, but basically everyone knew of me. And those who were still alive to remember when I was there in 1972, that's a while ago, when I started becoming dissertation. But I visited the community throughout those 40 years, so they knew I didn't have to. That's, by the way, one of the most difficult things to do when you make documentaries is to strike up a relationship with a stranger and get them to trust you. People trusted me immediately. That's why they poured out their stories, and people. It's interesting. Young filmmakers say, "How do you do this? How do you get people to open up?" And my answer to that is because I made a living teaching, I didn't have to make a living on documentary films. I didn't do them to make money. In fact, I haven't made anything out of documentaries. Or sometimes I got a grant proposal that purchased release time from the university that allowed me to make the documentary, but I haven't made money out of it. So I do the thing, make films about the things that I'm intrinsically interested in, and people catch it in my eyes. They know right away I'm not just there to milk their brains and disappear, that it's something that I care about. And I've been fortunate to be able to do that because I haven't had to make a living. So that's why I answer the question, how do you get people to open up, to establish trust? And it's just because I'm genuine and there's no monetary trick behind it all. Because once people sense whether it's a pastor in the church or anyone, if there's money behind it, people pick up on it right away, and you're out of luck.
Certainly. A viewer named Bernie asked, he said that in the film, you had touched the film touched briefly on the appearance of immigrants who were sympathetic to the communist movement in pre-war Finland. And Bernie mentions that members of their family immigrated to the United States after World War II, in part because of fears over retribution from the communists. In your research, did you learn anything about Finnish American attitudes concerning communism in the late 40s and early 50s?
Yes, quite a bit, as a matter of fact. The two most literate European immigrant groups, Eastern European Jews and Finnish Americans, they're tied. Sometimes Finnish Americans had a higher literacy rate than European Jews, other times vice versa. but they contributed more in terms of their proportion of the population to the American Workers' Party, the Communist Party, than any other group. Communism in its early days sounds like a good idea. Everyone shares, just help everyone out. It's a good idea. That's what families practice. But when it becomes a politically organized system, it develops into a dictatorship, and a brutal dictatorship. They didn't know that. Some Finnish immigrants traveled to the Soviet Union to build workers' communism, and they were devastated when they realized what it was. It sounds like a good idea, but it creates a horrible, horrible dictatorship. Gradually, the word about Stalinism and about brutal dictatorships and the loss of freedom crept into the community, and they abandoned. But the communists were involved. There was a socialist hall in Pelkie, and they practiced temperance, athletics, and they are largely responsible for the creation of the Pelkie Cooperative. It was their idea of communism was sharing, helping, and it seemed like a good idea. Then they gradually discovered what it was, and it died. Virtually none of the second generation Finns followed communism. In fact, I could almost say hardly any, if any. And if they did, it was a form of democratic socialism. Yeah.
Thank you. Linda asked, and I'm not totally sure whether she means in amongst the second, third generation or currently. She asked, please talk about the importance or lack thereof of religion amongst the community.
Yes, and I should have done more in the documentary about religion, but there's Finns are virtually all Lutherans. State church in Finland's a Lutheran church. But they had a way of splintering into different churches, sects, breakaways. There were 3 different apostolic churches in Pelkie, and a Lutheran church affiliated with former Suomi College, who became Finlandia University. So there are 4 different religious groups, and they did not. They were polite. If they were neighbors, you helped them, but there was this invisible barrier, and so I stayed away from going into the churches, because if I did one, I'd have to do 4, and I stayed away from. But for those people who practiced Christian compassion, that led a lot to the development of a cooperative culture in the community, very much. So it was basically loving, compassionate Christianity combined with rural Finnish traditions of helping, combined with more family and community-oriented socialist ideas of everyone being in the same boat, trying to help each other economically. Because a lot of the farmers were worried about they could feed themselves, but you had to get cash to pay for your land, otherwise the banks would take it. And so it was us against the banks, and we're all in it together, as well as all in it trying to survive UP winters. So that led to the cooperation. I'm not sure what your question was, but I hope.
I think so. A viewer named Lawrence was curious, just in your opinion. I'm guessing Lawrence may be from the Lower Peninsula like myself. In general, do you think that residents of the Upper Peninsula feel more connected to Wisconsin or to the Lower Peninsula of Michigan?
It all depends where you are. I mean, first of all, the Upers are connected to the UP. If you're in the Eastern UP, you support the Detroit Lions. If you're in the Western UP, you support the Green Bay Packers. And, so it's Motown or Cheeseheads, depending on where you live. But in terms of out-migration, the second generation children of the immigrants, I think about 73% migrated to urban areas, most of them to Detroit, but also Milwaukee and Chicago. And quite a few of them returned. I think it was 42% returned to live in Pelkie. But there is a strong connection to both Detroit primarily, but also to Milwaukee and Waukegan, Illinois, outskirts of Chicago.
I've got one last question here from a viewer named Monty, and then I'll make sure that I sign us off and thank everyone for their participation. Monty was just asking a little bit. You talked about sort of the influence that former President Trump often has in rural communities. If you could sort of talk about if you think that there are ways for other political groups to break through in rural communities.
That's a big question. First, I think I tend to be sort of a centrist, left of center person politically, but I realized we have 90% of the people in the outlying rural areas supporting former President Trump. In the towns, they're higher preponderance of college graduates and they're employed. So they think America's pretty great right now. But up in the rural areas, they've been devastated. And for the longest time, policymakers have ignored rural America, except the Republican Party has been very, very big on donating government funds to help farmers. Big corporate farmers support the Republican Party because they get more corporate handouts, quite frankly. But I think we have to realize what has happened, and it's been over a long period. I mean, this idea of people in rural areas aren't as sharp and as smart as people in urban areas. I mean, that goes way, way back to the development of urban communities. And what I learned in Pelkie, and this really flipped my head here, working on my PhD, thinking I'm smart. The people who are able to survive in the Upper Peninsula are so smart. They can read a manual and fix an automobile. They can wire their own homes. They can build their own computers. I mean, it's mind-boggling. They learn to do things that specialized, educated people have to pay for. So in many ways, they're smarter because they've been able to survive on the basis of limited resources. And I think people in urban areas have to recognize that rural America has been given a bad deal for a long period of time. You know, this idea they're backward hicks, they're stupid. That's just a negative stereotype. That's not quite as bad as racism, but just about as bad. So I think the first thing urban liberals can do is wake up. These are Americans too, and there's a reason why they're supporting to the point of 90% voting for Trump. But as far as specific policy proposals right now, Monty, I think we have to allocate funds to rural America, and broadband is one way. Social services, and do something to create employment in rural areas. That is the key. I mean, that's why people leave rural areas. They're all chasing careers. The third generation, people like myself, again, 74% moved away, but only 7% returned. Their parents, the same number, about 75% moved away, but 42% returned. Only 7% returned. Of the third generation, people like myself, grandchildren of the immigrants, and it's all related to employment. Many people would love to stay in the but they just have to chase the income. We know how difficult it is to survive without cash.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you for being here today. I want to make sure that I'm being respectful of everyone's time and yours, especially for being here today. I'm going to wrap us up. Thank you to so many of you who put in excellent questions, and that was quite a humdinger to end with, so I appreciate it. So I just once again want to thank all of you who participated in today's discussion, and thank you especially to Michael for giving of your time and for making this incredible film. Just a reminder that we are recording today's conversation, and that recording will be on our website, bridgemi.com, later this week. We'll also be having it available on our app. So if you are an app user, you can find the Bridge Michigan app on the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. Culture Club events are held every other month, so stay tuned for our next event that will take place in August. We'll announce what the subject will be in July. And that just a reminder that if you'd like to be eligible to receive our next Culture Club selection, consider becoming a Bridge Club member today. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. If it's sunshiny where you are, that you get out and enjoy it. And Michael, thank you once again. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.